silences and fears. You're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here. Yes, you're welcome here.
Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson. I'm really excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. I'm a civil human servant, and so what that means is that I serve humanity and try to do my work around building human peace and common ground. So it's in that effort that I'm looking at my own spiritual heritage to try to find those things in the teachings of Jesus, those ideas that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans, regardless of our different faiths, our different politics, and our different lifestyles. Right now, we are at the tail end of the story of Jesus by the account of Matthew. And we've just come through the crucifixion scene, which was a difficult passage to walk through, looking at the suffering of Jesus. But today, I'm really excited about this message because I think that it shows and demonstrates a method for making substantial social change. This practice that Jesus went through of suffering for the sake of the cause is one of the most powerful and strong and significant ways that we can really impact social change and make a difference in society. Let's go ahead and jump into the passage because there's a couple of things I want to walk through to help clarify what's going on in it. This is Matthew chapter 27, verses 62 through 66. Starting in verse 62. On the next day, which followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees gathered together to Pilate, saying, "Sir, we remember while he was still alive, how that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, 'He is risen from the dead.' So the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard, go your way, make it as secure as you know how." So they went and made the tomb secure, sealing the stone and setting the guard. What I absolutely love about this particular part of the story of Jesus is that Jesus has had everything thrown at him at this point, and he's been killed. The chief priests and the Pharisees, who are the religious leaders of his day, they have done everything possible to destroy him and his work and his movement and his influence on society. But they are freaking out right now, and Jesus isn't even alive, which is such a wonderful thing to see. And I want to walk through the passage, talk a little bit about what is actually going on here and what some of the words actually mean in the Greek that it was written in, because they give us some idea of what was actually being said. So let's walk one by one through this passage, each of these verses, and talk about what's going on in them. So this is the second day after Jesus' death. Matthew points out that this is the day after Jesus' death, which means that they had spent a day in preparation. We talked about that last study. Joseph of Arimathea, who's this wealthy guy, basically donates his time to and donates his own personal tomb to Jesus to be sealed in it. And he takes care of the body along with the Marys, a couple of women who came along as well. Took care of the body, put it in linen and gave it a death of dignity and placed it in the grave. So this is the day after that. And so now the chief priests and the Pharisees, so these are the top of the top in Jewish culture. So these are the leaders of the leaders. The chief priests were the ones who were like the Pope, essentially. They had a group of popes, but it was essentially that kind of level. And then the Pharisees were the really what would be the Supreme Court, if you will, in their society as well. So these are the big guns for the kingdom of Israel. And they're coming before Pilate, who is the governor selected by Rome to oversee this area of Judea, basically, because Rome is currently the empire that is controlling Israel, and it's a big upset, of course, for Israel. So these chief priests and these Pharisees, they come before Pilate and they ask him a question. Well, first of all, they call Jesus a deceiver, which is just amazing. I want to talk about what that word means. So they say, hey, we remember that when this deceiver was alive, that he told everybody he was going to raise himself from the dead 3 days later. And then they say that, well, we want you to give us a guard to sign as one and to make sure that this place is protected because, chances are that the disciples or his students are going to show up, steal the body, and then tell everybody that he rose from the dead, even though that's not the case. And then they say this interesting statement. Then the last deception, this resurrection, will be worse than the first when he was alive. I want to talk about the use of the word deception because that is going to be really relevant to us right here, 2,000 years removed from this situation. The same strategies, the same methodologies used by those in power, those who feel threatened that their power is going to be taken from them or that it's waning away. They call Jesus a deceiver. And so this word actually means somebody who causes another person to wander. In ancient Israel at this time, keep in mind that this is the Middle East. So it's very desert-like, which means that if you wander off the path between cities, for instance, if you're in Jerusalem, you want to go to Caesarea up north, you have to walk on a path that's designated for a number of reasons. One, that's where the water is going to be along the path. And if you don't have water, you don't have life. And if you get off the path, it is really easy to get turned around in the wilderness. And then you've got robbers, you've got animals, you've got a lack of nutrients and provisions. So in their society, they began to see that a path to a direction, to a destination was a nice way to talk about doing what's good and not doing what's good. Doing what's good meant walking this path and getting to the destination safely and with the best return possible. Wandering or getting off the path was a way that everybody understood would have bad consequences. So they basically are calling Jesus somebody who is putting everybody in danger and a deceiver. And they're worried now that he's going to deceive them even more than he did when he was in power and alive. So Pilate gives them a guard, right? I'm sure Pilate is just tired of this because he's already washed his hands of Jesus earlier on in the story. He doesn't want to have anything to do with Jesus. His wife doesn't want to have anything to do with him as well because they both know that Jesus didn't do anything. He didn't do any crimes. But in fact, they knew it was because the people in power were jealous and envious of his attraction to the people. And in fact, it says that. Matthew points that out. And so Pilate says here, okay, here's a guard, which is basically a few men and in uniform that you can go and do what you need to do. So they go to the tomb that Joseph had donated, Joseph of Arimathea. They seal it up, which means probably that they used, like a clay or their version of cement, and would seal up around the rock so that nobody could get in, and it would be obvious if somebody did break in. And they had guards stationed there so that the disciples couldn't get by and steal the body. Now I'm going to leave us hanging on a little bit of a cliffhanger until Monday when we start talking about what happens the next day, because this is a big story and there's a lot that goes into conversing about the resurrection. And I'm excited to have you there Monday to talk about resurrection and how we look at it, especially as a society who comes from a very scientific perspective, and looking at faith and miracles. It's going to be an interesting conversation. Right now, I want to bring some really important things out of the passage today. I want to talk about how power is exercised, the different ways power is exercised. And we have such a beautiful example of what that looks like right now in this passage. We have the chief priests and Pharisees. These are the individuals who are in power. Because of their power, they have wealth, they have influence, they have a system that holds them up, and it makes their life easy. You know, they think it's hard because they're living all these purity rules and all these rituals and having to do all that, but they really have no idea what hard looks like. And then there's Jesus on the other side of this coin, who's trying to go a different route, because he's all about helping those who are suffering and saying, look, you guys are supposed to be the ones to help the suffering, but they're not. In fact, they're making it harder for the poor and the suffering to actually even get to God because of all the requirements that they have to go to get there. So Jesus is using a different type of influence. Obviously, we have Judas, who betrays Jesus because he's upset that Jesus doesn't turn into this political figure. Jesus chooses not to go the route of military or militia. He doesn't use violence. He doesn't use politics. He doesn't use deception. He uses love. Jesus uses love, goodness, mercy, compassion, humility as a method to make social change. And it worked. So much so that the religious leaders of his day were freaking out about him even after he had died. That is power. I want to talk about these two different powers a little bit, because I think we can see some similarities in our day and age right now. We see these politically, religiously, socially, on our social media feeds, on our newsrooms, in social situations, at church even. On the first hand, we have this methodology for moving and influencing people that the Pharisees and the chief priests and the wealthy use. And that is essentially influencing people through fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They are using stress hormones that the brain naturally produces when it fears not being able to survive, when it fears violence is coming at us, when it fears that it is no longer going to be safe, or it's threatened or not welcomed into the community, and so then going to be threatened. It does produce an influence in humanity. We are wired to respond to those situations by standing in line, by getting in line, that is, by doing what they tell us to do, because we don't want to have to suffer. That's just ingrained in us. And so it is an influencer. It does affect us. And we can see that today. Individuals who spend all of their time talking about how individuals are lying or are deceptive or should be feared. They talk about uncertainty economically, socially, unless they're in power. They make sure that people doubt what they believe by questioning their own realities and telling them that, for instance, the religious leaders back then, telling the poor people, you are poor because you're poor and you've made bad life choices. That same argument has been provided for us today in our churches right now in the pews. Ministers are telling people they are poor because they have chosen bad things in life. Perhaps in some cases that is the case. But for many poor people, there is no opportunity. They didn't get to go to college. They didn't have a family that raised them to learn how to read or how to provide for themselves. They didn't have a family that provided love and encouragement and development as a human being. The whole point of this kind of influence is to create fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But I want to close on this. The most powerful and influencing methodology is love, is suffering and compassion and empathy. What I really appreciate about Jesus's method, that actually is picked up later by Gandhi when he moved the nation of India to throw off sort of the stronghold that England had over them. And Martin Luther King Jr., who later used the same methodology that Jesus does in order to throw off the burdens of Jim Crow laws and to create civil rights for all people. Jesus demonstrates that suffering on behalf of a good cause makes people feel something. It makes them feel compassion. That's another way that we're built as human beings. We have an inherent need to see justice fulfilled. When we see somebody get hurt, we want to help them, usually speaking, unless you're a narcissist or psychopath. But generally speaking, we want to help people. And so when we reach out and do good things and bad things happen to us, that justice takes over in everybody's mind and recognizes it. And so when somebody comes at us with love and with compassion and with humility and with peacemaking, it makes us feel good. And this is the difference between the religious leaders and the wealthy. Jesus' method uses dopamine in our brains as a neurotransmitter that makes us feel good. Compassion makes us feel good. Humility makes us feel good about ourselves when somebody else lifts us up instead of themselves. Peacemaking makes us feel good because we don't have to fear violence. Forgiveness makes us feel good because we are released from a debt or an obligation to another person. These feel-good feelings are far more powerful than any fear can be. Because in the fear and the uncertainty and doubt, all there is stress. It's stress and it's overwhelming for people. But when you come from a place of goodness and of love, exhibiting suffering so that people see what's right and pay attention and have empathy, we can create real social change. And that's where I really want to leave today, to just reiterate and to state again the power of suffering. And I want to encourage you, as I've spent some time in preparation of this, thinking about how I can use this means to influence others, to put myself in a place that causes me to suffer in some way for the sake of somebody else. It doesn't take much. Go and help somebody move. Go and help somebody finish a project. Do something for somebody. It causes us to suffer in some small way. But that effort impacts people in a way that no other stress or fear or doubt or uncertainty can, because they will want to do the same thing. I really appreciate your participation in this Bible study. It's been a really eye-opening experience for me as somebody who comes from a very Christian background, as a minister from a Christian faith, in a very conservative evangelical group of Christianity. This process has been life-altering, mind-altering for me, to step away from the Jesus that I saw and learned about in the structure of what is a lot of times evangelical or conservative, and coming to find the Jesus that is laid out here in this document, and to see the differences that are exuded, and to see the kinds of focuses and virtues that are important. And I really appreciate you being a part of that process with me. I would love it if you could leave your comments or suggestions, ideas. If you don't agree with me at all, I would love to hear why. If you agree with me, please let me know why. It's important for me to grow and to learn, as it is with everybody else who may read those comments as well. I would, of course, love it if you would like my Facebook page. And if you're on YouTube, there's a little box right down here that says subscribe. You can click on that and we can stay in contact, because I'm going to be working hard to make sure that I promote peace and common ground amongst our human species, because it feels like there are few people doing that right now. And so having you on board, having you there to be a part of the process, to be a part of changing our world, to be able to look to hope and goodness as our end goal, as opposed to wealth and power. Thank you for joining me. And until tomorrow, well, actually not tomorrow, Monday, when we meet again live at noon, I want you to know that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now I would invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day and the rest of our weekend, loving those around us the same way. Thank you.